Yeah. Okay. So it's been a while. They have posted the changes, which were generally pretty positive, but still want to point out some issues with them. A while ago for Death Knight, the reason we have not done it until today is a lot of the it wasn't changed yet on the actual alpha, and I think it's pretty important that not only do we get to actually look around to this stuff, but also play with it on alpha a bit and just give us a little bit more perspective and talk about the trees a little more. It's not going to be nearly as long for the as the earlier one we did, but I just kind of want to go through and talk about the decision making throughout a tree and like what you're able to get. And then we're not going to talk too long about the Unholy tree because they're still doing a lot there, right? Like this is an unfinished product.
Yeah.
So we can talk about a few of the changes they made, but not go super deep into it. And then I want to talk a little bit more about the Blood Tree with Kyrasis and Dorky. Now that we have a second like Blood Decay on here, and also you guys have had the opportunity to actually play these on Alpha a little bit, even though you don't have exact 70 points, but just to kind of get an idea for that. And before we start on the entire tree, though, what do you guys think about the changes they've made in general, without getting into specifics, and the communication from the developer?
Spectacular. That's all I can really say. Like, they're listening and they're doing what needs to be done, and honestly, I love it.
And even from the blood perspective, yeah, there's no real downsides with the changes that they've made to the general tree at all.
It is actually the most impressive thing that I've seen so far from any single post by a developer was the post that not only explained their thought process behind the DK tree, but also posted an actual picture, and we're like, here are the changes. Obviously, the initial reaction is like, wow, this is so much better, but we're actually going to get into like how that's better in a second. But yeah, this is definitely wow, like look at all this, just like absolute insane feedback. But we're going to stay off a lot of this Unholy stuff. All right, so what about the general class tree? Do you guys... I know there's one thing we're all going to agree on that is clearly a problem near the bottom of the tree, and I'm sure they're aware of it as well. But how do you guys feel about the changes they've made specifically to the general class tree as far as the decisions you have to make?
Very positive.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Martin.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I think it's very, very positive. It's you have a lot more freedom, and you can actually like feel like you can make a build more so than just go down a row.
Yeah, this is actually a problem that has existed between a few of the specs. I just got done talking about hunters. I'm not sure if you guys are watching, but like there's a few classes that are like these class trees have totally different philosophies almost. Like one major one you can look at is the bottom of the trees and how they're treating these. Like you guys have like basically utility, a little bit of throughput at the top, a little bit of throughput, a little bit of utility in the middle. At the bottom, it's pure throughput. There are classes, including some that have multiple roles in it, just like yours, that, you know, it's the capstones are purely based on utility. They're, you know, this is all just like, oh, pick whatever you want. And all those decisions are super nice. Death Knight is one of those where I feel like you are kind of picking a little bit of throughput throughout the tree, but it doesn't really feel bad in this new configuration. You can kind of still grab what you specifically need for a fight, but I do think there is still some issues with some of the choices you're making, which we'll go into. So I'm actually not going to look at your all's like pre-made builds. I actually think it makes a lot of sense to go through it and talk about the decision making that still exists together and kind of go through it.
Sure.
For all of it. So let's just pretend we're a DPS DK right now, right? The first problem I kind of see in this tree that still exists, and I want to know if you guys agree with me or not, is you grab kick every time. Makes sense, because you're on the road to IBF, and you will always have IBF. Now, this is the first thing that I don't quite really like. There's absolutely a scenario. Permafrost, I'm under the impression that this is not a super high power level talent, right?
It's not, but I mean, it's still free defense. Like, it's okay.
It's okay in Mythic Plus. It has like some decent value. Like right now, you get like between like 500k to 1 million healing overall in the key, which is decent, I guess.
That's pretty decent, yeah. That was kind of my main issue. Is it felt like there's absolutely content where you don't take Blinding Sleet, even though it's a fantastic ability. There's absolutely content, specifically raids, where there are fights where you don't kick and anticipation wouldn't be as good. There's also even fights where you kick and you still wouldn't take anticipation based on when you have to kick and exactly like what spec you're playing and stuff like that. And to where permafrost is like kind of the only spot. I just feel like there's kind of a scenario where all three of these are kind of meta picks, and you're always going to IBF, so it just kind of felt a little strange to me. The rest of it seems great though, except for the right side, which we'll get to in a second. So you're always going to grab Death Strike even as a DPS DK, no question. Always going to grab AMS. Always going to grab Death's Advance, and I believe you will always take Veteran of the Third War. This is kind of where I think it's an interesting thought, because you do really want to get down to where's the node that's important here. It's like there was a reason that you wanted to spend like a decent amount of points on the right side of tree, if I remember going back. It's to get to 20 required points. That's what it is. But like you definitely 10% stam per point is like kind of crazy. And then now you're just sitting here trying to figure this out, because like you don't necessarily need Raise Dead. It's pretty good as like a Frosty K, for example. As Unholy, you start with it. Cleaving Strikes for Frost, not great in a lot of content, can be fine. Control Undead, Total Tech, Sacrificial Pact, very weak power level. Enfeeble, it's kind of whatever. Does this work on bosses, by the way? Do we have any way to know? I figured it would kind of maybe be a debuff, but I don't know if this will work on bosses, right?
Not yet
Oh,
implemented.
no, yes. I'm assuming the DR will work on bosses, but we can't know until we can test it.
Yeah.
I mean, if it does work, it could be very strong if you get it at the right time.
Yeah, absolutely. No question. And also, because it will certainly not apply the movement speed, so it's kind of weird. Who knows how the debuff will work, but yeah, and then Brittle, right? So Brittle's the only, one of the only throughput options in this entire top of the tree here, which makes you feel like you want to get it, but none of the decisions to get it, at least for Frost, really feel great. But you are going to need to kind of spend these points to get to 20, right? Because if you just go through normal thought process, grab the crit, grab the IBF cooldown, Chains of Ice, one additional enemy. I actually, thinking about this more, I love that you actually have a chance to potentially choose this now, because it kind of makes Cold Heart a like really nice 2-target cleave option with Chill Streak, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's really fucking cool. And then like Anti-Magic Zone, almost always, although there is a world where you do a fight where you potentially don't really have to AMZ and Wraithwalk, right? Like there are fights where AMZ actually does nothing.
That's actually something I wanted to bring up. Like I don't really, in a sense, I don't like Wraithwalk being locked behind AMC, because you don't always want AMC, but where you necessarily want Wraithwalk.
True. But that's also true the other way around as well. Like there are fights where
Yeah.
you don't really need Wraithwalk. We've been dealing with that with it being a talent for a while, but yeah. And then now it's kind of this weird thing where like Assimilation is definitely going to be fight specific. On Frost, you're probably going to slam this, right? Just because like Breath exists, but like Runic Empowerment, and now you're sitting here with 7 points to really go down into the meat of your tree, which basically means like, okay, this is like a pretty free shot to go and grab Brittle. You're not going to need all of this utility for everything. So you just kind of run it down, probably grab Enfeeble if that works, grab Brittle, whatever, grab Strength because you also want this Strength node, grab Lichborn, and then now before you even get to 20, you're kind of always getting Unholy Ground. But I wanted to talk to you guys about Unholy Ground a little bit, because this is also something that feels a little bad, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's just not always useful. Like you're gonna want to go down the right side of the tree to grab stuff like Brittle or Unholy Bond, but the stuff that you need to take to get there isn't always super impactful. Like a Frost Death Knight's almost never going to be casting D&D unless you're in multi-target. So Unholy Ground is kind of meh, and even in that scenario, 5% haste doesn't really do much of anything for Frost DK. So it's just meh all around.
But you could also always go Will of Necropolis instead, right? If you want.
Yeah.
Go for it. Yeah.
I
so
definitely,
feel
you
like
I
it's-
love the
Echo,
choice.
though.
I love the choice after Unholy Ground. Like everything after you already have this point, it's like the based on the fight, these are insane options, right? I mean, obviously you're always slamming Unholy Bond, but like coming from Unholy Ground, like this is like the option. Like Death's Echo and Will of the Necropolis are actually excellent choice nodes. It's basically a choice node, right? With the way you're going to fill out the tree. Like, this is fucking unbelievable. You'd absolutely use both of these a decent amount, the expansion. But in my opinion, it's actually one of the few choices you're actually going to make as, like, a DK. That's, like, definitely, we're not going to get into this super a lot right now, but, like, this definitely one thing from the theme of these trees, a few of the trees versus others, is that there's absolutely way less choice from what you would select. But also that's mainly because the DK tree just has so much more throughput than others, but that's a whole different conversation. All right, so from here as a Frost DK, right, you're slamming Icy Talons, second charge of Room Weapon, Attenuation.
Rune Mastery.
Yeah, Rune Mastery, Horn of Winter, And now
But
we're
you
sitting.
don't necessarily slam Horn of Winter.
Yeah, true. Yeah.
But
So
I think
now,
it's good that you can pick Rune Mastery without taking Horn of Winter.
Absolutely.
yeah, definitely that was a nice change. So now you're sitting here without Horn of Winter, with 2 points, and the rest of this is kind of nice. So on an execute fight, you could take Soul Reaper. On a grip fight there are absolutely fights where having 2 charges of Death's Advance is so fucking insane, right? So like Death's Echo is super powerful. Defensively, you have a Will of the Necropolis choice. You have the super long breath Horn of Winter tech. Okay. The issue that I see is the one thing you would really, really want to get is obviously A-Bomb Slim. But
Yeah.
this is just the biggest barrier. This is one of the biggest barriers that exist on any class tree. A completely irrelevant choice node for DPS DKs to grab something that is very useful in a raid environment.
Yeah, I mean, the improved Death Strike, it's nice to have in PvP. It's nice to have for blood, but it doesn't really do anything for DPS DKs, especially with all the defenses you can pick up earlier in the tree. It's like, why do we even need this? I really want to see that node replaced with something a little bit more universally good, so it's a lot more accessible to grab A-Bomb no matter what.
Well, I mean, because I don't think it should be like, it's we're like as a DK, you're not saying like, what, it would be nice if we had all of our capstones. Like I get that. It's just
Yeah.
that the rest of these decisions, even if they were more competitive, the difference between slamming Unholy Bond, slamming Icy Talons, and slamming Improved Death Strike are just a totally different world. But also maybe it comes with the power level of Death Strike kind of coming in question. Death Strike is actually maybe, as a DPS DK, is maybe one of the most underrated abilities in the entire game. It is absolutely absurd for surviving in PvE content, but it's just because of the way that it works. It doesn't have to do with buffing it with any spells or any points, right? It's just the whole function of Death Strike without any points alone. You press it, you're alive, and it doesn't matter if you have to press it twice, because if you press it once and you're alive, so many other people are dead if you're also dead. So it doesn't matter that you press it more.
Yep.
So yeah, just a thought I had. I'm sure you guys feel the same. Do you guys have any other thoughts really on the bottom of the tree before we kind of talk about some tech choices up top?
I don't know what I want to feel about Blood Draw.
Yeah.
It feels like I've been looking at the tree a fair amount, and I don't see a reason why I would ever pick it. Especially as a DPS, though.
It certainly feels geared towards blood, and we can kind of make a blood tree with Kyrasis and Dorky in a second, before we move on to some of the spec stuff, which almost nothing has changed actually in the spec stuff, but I do want to look at the blood one later. Where, yeah, it seems like it's there for blood, and this is there for blood, and it's just like this giant wrench in the middle of the tree for the way the DPS is interacting, but it doesn't have to happen that way. Like, other trees have multiple specs that are involved with them, and they've been able to allow you to get all the stuff that you feel like you need, and then the rest of it is pure choice. There's actually not too much choice here for DK. Like, if you're playing a Frost DK, you have a 2-point window to slam. You do have powerful options, right? Like, you have 20-second reduced AMS. That is so good, right? Blinding Sleet if you need it for CC, that's good. Leech or Avoidance, depending on the fight, is whatever. But do those compare to potentially Soul Reaper on like a execute boss, or depending on tuning, or grabbing Horn of Winter? You don't really have a lot of tech options with your actual build, but you do have a lot of very interesting, powerful 1-point options in the bottom of the tree. What would you guys like to see changed, if you have any ideas?
Tree in general?
Let's talk about, sure, it can be tree in general, or just kind of the bottom half too.
I was more thinking, because this might be interesting, but I don't see why we still have Death Strike as a general pick. Like, could we improve Death Strike up and get something else? I feel like we're lacking some general abilities.
What do you mean? Are you talking specifically this node, or are you talking about starting with Death Strike?
Starting with Death Strike.
Okay. So you're saying just making Death Strike the way it is right now passive?
Yes. And then getting enhancement to abilities. Like, I feel like we're kind of starved on baseline DK stuff.
Okay, I kind of see that. Like, for an example, you could make like AMS the middle. I mean, clearly, thematically, which really matters to them in this, there's a reason that it starts with Frost ability on the left, Blood DK ability in the middle, Unholy thing on the right? That's very deliberate. So I think having replacing with something else like that, is more of the line of like it makes sense gameplay wise, but there's definitely an element of lore and being super epic in that way in these trees. So I doubt they'd change it.
Yeah, it just feels
Yeah.
like that one line is really useless at the moment. Because like if you look at every single one of the specs, going down, I see talents to pick up Empower Rune Weapon. That's really good, and getting Unholy Bond is also really good. Even if you're a Blood Decay, those are insanely good choices. But Improved Death Strike is the only one that like really serves no purpose. Like even as a Blood Decay, you only want 1 point into it. Having all 3 points doesn't really help that much. And it's locking a bomb limb behind all those points. So it just comes down to like it feels like it's only really there for PvP, honestly. I don't really see any situations where you really want to get a bomb limb. Unless you just have to. It feels like you
Yeah.
have to sacrifice way too much to pick up a bomb limb at the moment, even if you're a blood.
Yeah, definitely agree with you there. Like, even if they moved, say, Unholy Bond over to its position and put something new there, that would increase the quality of life down there, and being able to grab A-Bomb's limb or anything else just so much better.
Yeah, like a take I've seen a bit in my Twitch chat is like just swapping A-Bomb's limb and Blood Draw. The only issue I have with that is yes, it does kind of put a very Blood Decay centric ability in Blood Draw in behind improved Death Strike, but it's also like Blood Decay is not a spec that's trying to just slam 3 points and improve Death Strike, right? So it's just kind of like at that point you're admitting defeat to whatever is going to be in this node for the rest of the expansion is just going to be ignored, and that can't be correct, right? It has to be better than that. So I believe they'll look at this. I wonder how they'll deal with it. I don't think they'll reduce the 3 points at the bottom, because right now DKs are able to get almost everything they want in
Yeah.
this tree currently, and more stuff than they have before. But I do want to relate it to other classes kind of briefly. So Death Knight was one of the first trees released. It was one of the first two, and since then they have certainly like increased in quality as the newer ones have come out. Rogue was released, was widely recognized as just an insanely well-made tree. Shaman got released yesterday, absolute banger tree. Like, I mean, just the choices are insane, but more importantly, I think a lot of things get lost in choice because there can be the illusion of choice. You can just be sitting there choosing things you've already had. The reality is the good trees are ones that allow you to have everything you used to have before, make cool selections to get rid of things you don't use on all content to make yourself more powerful in that content, and more importantly than anything else, you just have your old stuff, but a bunch of new cool shit too. And I think Death Knight maybe doesn't achieve that as much in the class tree. You achieve it in the spec tree. Like Frost DK has all of its insane AoE stuff that it's, like they brought it all back, just all of it, plus Chill Streak, plus 2-target cleave, Cold Heart kind of thing. Like you do kind of have everything you have currently as a Frost DK, but more Rage of the Frozen Champion, and Breath, and all of your Biting Cold, Remorseless Winter stuff. But in this class tree, it seems a bit more. You're kind of just funneled into a certain spot, and there's way less choice than other classes have. Do you guys agree with that?
Absolutely. And I think the main reason behind that is because they removed so much from Death Knight baseline. There's really nothing there that they can use the tree to enhance or change or, allow you to switch it up a little bit. And I think that's the main reason why it is the way it is.
Yeah.
That's what I wanted to say. Like when you look at like other classes, like Rogue specifically, like is one of them I think, where you have double stun, you have kick, you have a lot of stuff that is in the baseline tree, and then you go to like DK, and you have like the first thing is Chains of Ice, you have Death Strike, and it's something you just have baseline currently that just you have to pick instead of picking like an enhanced version. Like take Rogue Get Sprint baseline, we have to pick Depth's Advance instead of getting like Depth's Advance Conduit to Depth's Advance or something else.
Yeah. I also think functionally one thing that feels weird in the tree that other trees don't have an issue with at all is this. The point where you've gone down 2 major parts of the tree and you need 7 points, and you just spend 7 points, most of them being completely irrelevant, just to get here and continue.
Yep. Absolutely.
That's no other spec that I've dealt with has had to deal with that specifically. So I think that's something that with these new trees needs another pass.
Yeah, I think if you were to count them up, there's like 34 abilities in the Death Knight tree, not including the 2-point additions, and there's 31 points. So you're basically like grabbing almost everything in the tree. So it's kind of devoid of choice when you're able to grab everything.
I guess something else you can do too that I wasn't really thinking of is you could just ignore Raise Dead, ignore Enfeeble, potentially ignore Brittle, because Brittle doesn't actually cost 1; it costs 4, right?
Yep.
To get there, and then you just slam Suppression, Strength. This still have to get Unholy Ground, which is weird, and then I guess you have just a lot more tech points you can do based on the tree to move on. You can just skip this, grab that, grab a little leech, grab a kick, and then you're still kind of going down the same spot. You can see that.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's a super defensive build that you'll probably see in like Mythic rating scenarios where you actually just skip over the entire top right, but go super defensive with like Permafrost, reduced AMZ, increased AMZ, AMS improvement. Like you can go super defensive in the tree if you wanted to.
Yeah.
Just feels a little bit bad that you can't grab A-Bomb when everything else is so accessible.
Yeah. So we'll probably move off of the improved Death Strike thing, but definitely. Yeah, the top right of the tree feels weird for Blood and Frost. Actually, let's talk about that. Actually, Kyrasis and Dorky, if you guys would want, I actually don't know what the current what you'd really want for Blood DK here, if you were starting from that point before we move on to the spec trees at all.
A lot of the early and mid tree pathing actually looks very similar to what you're doing with the DPS specs. And in fact, we're kind of in the same situation too with those Unholy Talents, where if you're in a raid scenario where you're not getting much benefit out of the Death and Decay, that you could just drop it all and go really heavy on the utility. But
Okay.
we definitely want to go down through Frost over to Runic Empowerment. Go down to Blood to probably AMZ. And
Okay.
Unholy, we go all the way down through Unholy Ground, like you were doing. with
And
the
then
DPS
you can just
trees.
spend, and then depending on the content, you could put this point in Wraith Walk, shorter AMS, Leech, or dude. Yeah, you guys might also cut through this tree. I feel like you're missing some stuff. Like Blood DK, this is so good. Okay, but yeah.
So that AMS talent is nice in a lot of content.
Yep.
And we'd probably take off Lichborn and go with the D&D Snare or the Long Grip.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
It is worth noting, though, that haste on the Death and Decay is a lot better for Blood than it is for the DPS specs. We do not mind casting Death and Decay at all, and we can cast it a lot more often than they can.
All right. And then for, I think Blood DK, I think Death's Echo is pretty much anything outside of Raid is going to be a guaranteed take the entire expansion. Just having 2 Death Grip charges is so insane.
I'm not so sure about that, actually.
Really? Okay.
It really just depends what you're doing. Like, if you're going for... Do you want to start with a Mythic Plus build or something more Raid
Yeah, let's
centric?
talk Mythic Plus for a second.
So for Mythic Plus, let's just go down through Frost, get Runic Attenuation, Icy Veins, Eternal... Let's see, Empower Rune Weapon, Rune Mastery, Will of the Necropolis, all 3 points in Improved Death Strike for now, and Abomination Limb.
Okay. Yeah,
So,
skipping
and
Unholy Bond feels bad. I wish they'd make Unholy Bond passive, honestly.
Well, at least for Blood, all 3 of those 3-point talents aren't very impressive per point of talent you're spending in them. You're mostly going through them to get the capstone talent, with the exception of maybe the first point of Improved Death Strike, because there is actually a lot of value in there with the 5-point Runic Power Cost reduction. But
yeah, I was thinking about dropping A-Bomb Limb personally and dropping 2 points from Improved Death Strike. Because that way, you still get the big value of Improved Death Strike, but you can put points into things like Unholy Bond, or even 1 point into Death's Echo. So you're effectively trading like a tiny bit of extra Death Strike healing and having A-Bomb Limb versus having all these other potential really good options, right?
Yeah, it doesn't really feel very good, though.
Well, the thing with Soul Reaper and Abomination Limb, too, that's worth pointing out is that for Blood, those are going to be doing around the same damage as they're doing for the DPS specs, so we're just getting relatively more damage than they are with both of those talents, with Abomination Limb being more of AoE damage and Soul Reaper being more single target. So yeah, in a raid build, you might very well just go 1 point Improved Death Strike and then go all the way down to Soul Reaper on the right, and then drop either Runic Attenuation or Rune Mastery, depending on how the numbers work out on those abilities.
Okay.
And while we're in the area too, you guys were pointing out how blood draw might be more blood centric, but for blood you kind of go below 30% health all the time. So
It's not going to
mostly
be
just going
controlled.
to-
It's just going to proc off cooldown. In a lot of cases, it won't be an AoE, which is the only scenario where it's good.
Yeah, the raw numbers on it aren't really good enough to justify it just from that perspective. So, if anything, I had the opposite perspective where I thought maybe it might be useful for the DPS specs because it's not looking so hot on blood. Like if you're in Mythic Plus and you get knocked down to low health, maybe full heals you in a trash pack and you don't die. But I'm not really sure if it's worth the 1 point for them for that.
I could maybe see it in PvP, but that's the only scenario I could see it in.
Wait, so does it heal that much? Blood draw?
Well, it's a 3-minute cooldown. It does okay damage and healing when it procs, but it's not going to be procking very often.
I was just thinking for a DPS DK, that actually might sound kind of insane. Like that's like a mini cheat death, wouldn't it be? Like, you basically just like sometimes, if you accidentally stand in something, you just instantly heal back to full. That could be interesting for 1 point.
I mean, maybe in a Mythic Plus scenario, I could see that if you're at risk, you're doing like, say, like plus 30 keys. That may be actually an option because you're not going to take Soul Reaper anyway. So maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah, you wouldn't be taking Soul Reaper in Mythic Plus.
Oh no. Yeah. Man,
Did
I
wanna-
really see. I feel like DK, as opposed to other classes, are just choosing between things that they have at the moment, and they're not really gaining anything they don't. Like Blood DK is literally gaining empowered rune weapon, so it is gaining something it doesn't currently have access to. But I feel like you're
Getting a
choosing
lot.
between a bunch of stuff that's all available to you now, with like a couple of exceptions, and other classes are having that, and then they're just getting so much more, especially the newer ones to be released. So I don't really know how hard it would be to go back into these trees and kind of add a lot of that. It's probably the answer is really making some more things baseline. But that is definitely something that is very apparent anytime you're moving these trees around. Because like it's okay to make a decision and be like, okay, I can't have A-Bomb's Limb and Death's Echo, right? That's fine. That is something you could make the choice, and like it's not, you shouldn't just be able to have everything, and like choices matter. I get it. It's just that it definitely feels a lot better to choose between two new things on top of what you're already doing, like other classes are doing, versus two things that you already have, right? Those choices do not feel as good.
Yeah, I did want to point out something with Blood's resource situation, though, before we finished up with this tree and then eventually went into the Blood tree. Because we have never had access to Runic Empowerment or Runic Corruption before on Blood, and it just gives us an insane amount of rune regeneration. It's on row 7.
Oh, sorry, where? This?
To the left of Assimilation.
Oh, this.
It's on the frost line.
Oh, I'm so confused. Oh,
Yes.
Runic Continuation, you mean?
Yeah, that's normally a Unholy or Frost ability, or not ability, a passive.
Yeah.
And
So-
we're
Runic
getting that on
Continuation.
Blood Decay for the first time. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
and
with
Empower Rune Weapon is also an insane survival cooldown as well.
Yeah, that's also very good. But with Runic Empowerment and full talent trees in both the Blood tree and the General tree, you can get to a point where you're doing nothing but Heart Striking and Death Striking, and you'll never run out of globals. And you'll never run out of runes. That's also why we really aren't looking at Horn of Winter too closely, because it does generate 2 runes with a global cooldown, and that would be great in like any previous patch. But it is just not good with the level of rune regeneration that we have in these trees right now.
That's kind of insane. That sounds to me with the current tuning of Blood DK that they're going to be like actually like unkillably strong defensively. So we'll see like kind of where that goes into the spec tree, but they would have to like kind of nerf their ability to heal, I think, if they're actually able to Death Strike so much more than they are now. But also there's like a whole other conversation we can have after this when we're talking about like Dancing Rune Weapon and the whole like tier bonus in their tree, because I think it's a pretty spicy Death Knight topic actually, to talk about the playstyle difference between normal DK and current 4-set DK, which will exist into next expansion as far as like the intricacy of how you play it instead of just spamming Heart Strike, right?
Yeah, it'll be a little bit different, but it's definitely strong enough that it's still going to be a thing if they printed these talents as they are and put them on the live game.
Yeah. Okay. So that's enough of the class tree. I think that works. Let's talk I did want to bring up. We're not going to look at the Unholy tree today. We'll actually probably do this at a different time. This is still. I could be. You guys can clarify this. They're making major changes to this tree, but they're just not in, right? They made one change, like Festering Strike got changed to be wound damage and Festering Strike damage, which is good. And then also Festering Wound, as you mentioned, Taze, was considered a disease now. So with morbidity, it actually adds an extra with 2 points, another 6% damage to something that you have Festering Wound on.
Yeah, there was one other major change. They reworked Death Rot entirely. It no longer burst festering wounds. Just anytime you cast Death Coil, you get shadow damage. Sudden dupe procs twice.
Okay,
So,
cool.
Way better.
We will do a separate Unholy thing when they specifically add these and the tree is done with that. For now, probably going to skip over that. I do want to mention something with Frost. And when I first saw this tree, we had no other trees to really go off of, and I was really excited about it. And I still kind of am. My only real criticism of it is it seems like to do AoE, you do get really all the stuff you would ever hope for and want. But the tree, it seems like currently during the expansion, you're not actually going to like change really what you play. It's like a whole nother conversation where you're like taking Pillar, you're going down, grabbing Frozen Pulse Avalanche, whatever, Frostwhelp's Aid, and then over here you're going to grab Rage of the Frozen Champion. You grab this, grab Breath, and if you're in a full AoE scenario, you grab your Frostworm, and then you're done. You just have all these cool legendary effects. You get Biting Cold, you get Rage, you get Gathering Storm, you get, just all of it, right? But then to swap to single target, it's just a few points. And they're pretty obvious, right?
Yep.
So, and it doesn't really seem like you're ever going to really iterate on that. Unless you're playing a non-breath build, of course. You decide to go down to like Ice Cap or something. So what do you guys think about the Frost Tree? Again, from not necessarily your first impression, but now that you've seen how a couple of other DPS trees have filled out their points.
I mean, relatively the same as before for me. I would like to see some extra nodes added, so there's a little bit more versatility and choice, though, because I think when I counted it up, Frost Tree has 33 nodes and 30 points to spend. So, I mean, like, you're getting pretty close to getting everything you want already. So just add a little bit more, so there's a little bit more choice in there. It would be nice.
Yeah, I that's the exact take I had. Muffin, have you thought about this tree a lot since it's come out?
No, I mean, the only thoughts I had was like, you can get like all of your AoE, but it's like that's all there really is to the Frost Tree. It's just AoE. I feel like it's kind of lacking in the single target department, in terms of talents.
Yeah. All right. Now, again, we're not talking about Unholy. So DPS guys, you are clear to leave unless you want to talk about the Blood Tree a little bit with Taze and Dorky. But if not, you guys can feel free to say. All right. So has your all's opinion of the Blood Tree really changed since it's come out? Now that you've had like some time to play it, and because I think before we went down and got like, I think you got like the full current tier set bonus. There is a scenario where you could get Tightening Grasp, but not even select Gorfiend's Grasp, which was kind of weird, but you also really want Red Thirst, so you're probably going through it. What do you guys think about this tree?
What you do with the end talents in this tree is still a little bit up in the air because they still don't have numbers on that Vampiric Blood capstone in the bottom right.
Yeah.
And while they do have some numbers on Shattering Bone right above Bone Storm, it's a little buggy right now on PTR, and I wouldn't be surprised if we saw too much tuning, or if we saw any additional tuning with that, because that number is actually kind of crazy on there, and it does a pretty large amount of damage with even just one talent point invested in it right now. Its rank 2 actually doesn't work on the current alpha client.
Okay.
But just to give you a perspective of how strong some of these are right now, if you have Red Thirst talented with 2 points on the bottom right, and you have a full build running, you can get Vampiric Blood's cooldown down to around maybe 30 seconds. And for Everlasting Bond with the Dancing Rune Weapon talents, one over from the left, you can get your Dancing Rune Weapon extended to, it's looking to be about 30 seconds right now, with 10.0 gear levels. That's not quite as long as you can get it on live, but it's long enough that you would likely start playing around it.
Yeah, see, this is my take with Blood. So you guys both are Blood DK enjoyers. I've played Blood DK for a very long time. I've played it in the race world first in most tiers that I've done it. I think Blood Decay is most people's favorite tank to play if they do play all of them and play them at a high level, because it gives you like the most agency in your play. And I think specifically the thing that's the most fun is the fact that playing more greedy with Death Strikes is often the like proper way to play, and like kind of balancing when you do that, and just that whole process is just insanely fun to keep yourself alive basically. One thing I've seen change with this is a lot of that intricacy has gone away, and it's much more about just spamming Heartstrike now. And I wonder how you guys feel about that still being in the game, or if you've noticed that, or how you like the current playstyle of Blood, even though it's very powerful.
It's actually one of my biggest criticisms with Blood Decay since was it last patch pretty much? Yep. Because you don't feel like a DK anymore. You ignore most of the general rules you usually follow. So like normally you would follow the rule of trying to maintain at least 5 stacks of Bone Shield for Ossuary, trying to make sure you don't overcap, make sure you spend your blood boils, like all those little things, right? Putting putting D&D down in AoE. You just sort of can't do that anymore, because if you're ever doing that, you are scuffing your dancing rune weapon. And that's like one of the issues that people run into when they try to play Blood Decay. Like if you try to play it in the traditional sense, where you're just like following all these Blood Decay rules, you are misplaying and you're just making it so much harder for you to survive. You just rely heavily on your dancing rune weapon at the moment to stay alive. And like while this current version, so they changed it, right? Dancing went from, or well, Everlasting Bonds went from every rune you spend, that extends your dancing by 0.5 seconds. Now it's every Heart Strike and Death Strike extends by 0.33 seconds, which is actually 1 second because it counts the extra copies as well. So like in a sense, this sort of helps. It lets you Death Strike more instead of just spam Heart Strike. Like right now, you're gonna probably do something like, you know, Heart Strike, Death Strike, Heart Strike, Death Strike, repeat, instead of just like straight Heart Strikes across the board. But it's still not great, because anytime you have to press Blood Boil, for example, like let's say you're playing with a Frost DK who's popping off with Breath and Dragon, and you need aggro, you need to press your Blood Boils, you need to press D&D. But you can't, because you're going to drop your weapon. But on the other hand, your DK is going to die, and he's going to feel really bad. So it's like, how do you even balance all these different globals? Like, are you going to just let your weapon drop, or are you going to try to fit in all these globals in between?
Would adding Blood Boil to Everlasting Bonds tooltip solve a lot of problems?
Well, at that point, it's just extending it based on any
Yeah, that's
duration,
insane.
any ability you cast.
Yeah, but I mean, making people cast abilities matters. Like, I mean, look at, if you guys have ever done coaching, I haven't done this in years, but 9 out of 10 people, when you coach someone to help play the game better and you're watching a VOD of them, they just don't press their buttons on cooldown. Like that's a very real thing that people, it's hard to imagine, but like absolutely a ton of people just don't use their GCDs, right?
I've seen that a lot, actually.
Yeah, so like that's real. And that, I mean, it seems basic, like you just extends based on a certain amount of time, but it does require actively playing the game. But yeah, I mean, you're right. But I mean, like, I don't know how else you would solve that issue, but yeah.
Yeah, and the whole resource situation kind of feeds into it as well, because there's nothing stopping you from hard striking and death striking for every single GCD, because you're not going to run out of resources. So it's always going to feel bad if you have to blood boil or maybe even death and decay during dancing rune weapon window. I guess one way they could solve that is by murdering our rune regeneration. That'd be a little unfortunate, but there's other ways they could go about it as well.
Yeah.
And even outside of dancing rune weapon, there's just an issue where just any casts other than heart strikes and death strikes start to feel worse to cast in a lot of situations. Because the only thing Blood Boil really has going for it is that it's better uncapped damage, but it's going to be worse priority damage, and it's going to be worse survivability throughput.
Just real quick before we end this, can you guys take me down a Mythic Plus tree real quick? I already filled in the things that I'm pretty sure is correct. Actually, I'll take out the heart strike damage. I'm positive about that. Where do you guys go from here with Vamp Blood?
Do you want to take a shot at this first, or should I, Dorky? I don't care.
You can.
Okay. I would actually take that point out of Reinforced Bones. Reinforced Bones is actually not a bad effective health talent, but
Interesting.
I'm going to go down to Ossuary just for this example here.
Okay.
Because you also get Blood Drinker along the way, which for 1 point's actually a really good priority damage talent under normal circumstances. It gets a little complicated with Everlasting Bond, but we'll have to see how that plays out later. But you also don't have Death's Caress, so I mean, just having another ranged ability is kind of nice for setting things up in Mythic Plus, or even in Raid if you're just outside of range of the boss for a while. It's free damage.
Okay.
Then I would get Voracious. Voracious and Tombstone.
You're ignoring Rune Tap in this build then. What about Blood Boil?
No,
Charges?
we'll actually be putting 1 point into Rune Tap because we have endless runes, right? Normally the one thing with Rune Tap that is a little annoying about it is that if you're using it as a defensive cooldown, it'll help you survive burst damage, but you're actually losing like overall mitigation, throughput, and damage whenever you press that ability because of the rune cost. But hey, if we have runes to spare, there's no loss there, and if anything, we're just getting 10 runic power for free whenever we press that button.
Okay, sweet.
Then, let's see, improved Vampiric Blood. Then just for this example, just get all the Dancing Rune Weapon talents and all the Vampiric Blood talents. One thing I am pretty confident about in these trees...
Including Unquenchable Thirst?
Yeah, let's just assume it's good for now. We have no idea.
Okay, sure.
And one thing that is worth pointing out at the end here is that Purgatory just looks like a really bad trade to take compared to at any other time in previous expansions, because it's 3 talent points for just Purgatory, pretty much, because Tightening Grasp is almost worthless right before it.
Mm-hmm.
Where instead now it's fighting against Red Thirst, which is stronger than what Red Thirst is now, and also a talent that gives you extra damage on Vampiric Blood. And even if you were to take Bone Storm, it's like not only are you getting Bone Storm, which is sometimes a bit of a questionable talent, but Shattering Bone does do a lot of AoE damage right now, even though it's not giving you anything else. So I just don't see a world where you take Purgatory unless burst damage is a huge issue and you can't get a cheat death on a trinket.
Okay. Now you mentioned your full thought process. Dorky, how would you approach this?
Yeah, so I have like a slightly different build where I was thinking instead of going down Ossuary and Blood Drinker, which are sort of counterintuitive at the moment with the way Everlasting Bonds plays. Also, you don't need Blood Tap considering we have infinite resources.
Yeah, Blood
So
Tap
we
is
free up 3
worthless.
points. Yeah, so we free up 3 points that way, and then we can spend those 3 points on Hard Strike damage, which is a lot of our damage. It's above a Vamp Blood. Yeah, because
I got it.
Hard Strike is a very large portion of our damage, especially when you're just spamming Hard Strike all day long. And then we can go for the dancing stuff still, so the exact same, all 4.
Got it.
And then instead of going for red first, we go for Bone Storm. So you just go down all the Bone Storm stuff.
Okay, so 0 Red Thirst. All right. I mean, okay.
Yeah, so
explain that.
Yeah, so like this way, you have a way more offensive build. You lose Ossuary and you lose red first, but you gain Hard Strike damage, you gain the Shattering Bone damage, you gain Rapid Decomp, and you gain Bone Storm. I feel like this would be a really offensive, like probably the most offensive M+ build you can go at the moment. I mean, of course, unless the red, what do you call it, Unquenchable Thirst ends up being really strong.
Okay.
Like, this also helps with a lot of the AoE damage that Blood Decay lacks.
Quick question then. Yeah, actually I actually think Shattering Bone is an insane answer to their issue with consistent threat at the beginning of pulls now as well. But there's no cheat death trinket data mine for the first raid, at least that I remember. What happens when you're doing hard enough Mythic Plus content where going into pulls is pretty scary? You don't have a cheat death trinket like you have currently, and you don't have Purgatory. Is it possible that you are going to have to get rid of something just to have Purgatory to make DK viable and high enough stuff?
Depending on the expansion, sometimes you aren't at risk of dying instantly. BFA Season 1's a very good example. Player power was really low. Everyone had gigantic health bars based on the amount of damage that was coming in. So you really never missed having a cheat death for that season.
Okay, wait. Here's my take on it. So the only reason why we need Purg at the moment is because we're reaching key levels where we really shouldn't be touching at the moment. Like, people on live in Season 3 are doing plus 30s, plus 31, 32 even. And that's only because, one, DK is pretty overtuned at the moment. Like, the whole dancing tier set is broken as hell. Other tanks don't really compare to DK. 2 is we have Destrolox and Survival Hunters. I feel like we are reaching levels where we're like randomly getting one shot potentially only because where our power levels are way too high at the moment. Like the power creep has just reached way too much. Whereas normally if you're going into like season 1 of Dragonflight or season 2, I would imagine you probably aren't gonna need cheat death.
Okay.
Not, I mean, as long as you play like relatively.
Yeah,
decent,
obviously,
of course,
obviously you will die if you play bad, but yeah, I see what you mean. Like, because like Purgatory is something you want when there are things that could happen even when you are playing perfectly that are out of your control. That or even if you make a very small mistake outside of playing perfectly, you can just kind of just die. There's a lot of content that's really difficult where that exact thing isn't true, right? Like if you play at a high enough level, you're just in a position where you don't necessarily have to die. And the what you're, I think the worst thing about it though is I would rather the points to Purgatory not feel as useless. Like every like Heartrend is also like kind of a interesting one, but I mean like look at this row. Like Shattering Bone, OP as fuck. Red Thirst, OP as fuck, and all of them are capped by a 1 point capstone. But then the two in the middle are, I mean, Heartrend is better, but like Tightening Grasp is like what is that, right? Like, that's like, why would you have to pick Tightening Grasp to go on the way to Purgatory? I think that's like pretty decent criticism that might not be in the best spot.
Maybe this is too much
That's a lot of
copium,
points.
but maybe they could rotate the Purgatory and Gorfien's talents, so you put Purgatory at the top.
Oh, that is extreme copium. That's then you're making the thing that
Yeah,
we're talking about being bad a capstone. That is insane.
For sure.
Exactly.
Yeah, that is you are huffing it deep. That is insane.
Actually, I have a question for you here, Dorky. What are your thoughts about having only one charge of Blood Boil and not having Death's Caress for setting up pulls, mythic pulls?
It's definitely a little bit weird, but I think if you go for Dev's Echo, it's not as bad. Like having that extra grip as another range taunt, it's not the worst thing in the world, but it is very weird and it is very clunky. Also, with this, I've thought about dropping maybe Bone Shield Haste for like one of these options, or if you want to go for one more point into Gorfien's Grasp or
I don't
Blood
think you
Boil,
can, right? Don't you need 8 points up here? Oh, you easily have 8 points. You have way more than 8 points up here. I don't know if you guys are watching the Hunter one.
A little bit up there.
You'd actually be better off dropping a point from Improved Heart Strike rather than the Haste.
Do you
Yeah,
guys
or
feel
that,
like
one
you're
of those.
able to get down far enough in the tree than you want? It's different between the class. Like some classes are worse than others. Like if you're looking at the screen that I'm sharing, Hunters, we actually just went over this. And this is not a drill. This is not a joke. This is what they spend in pure single target in the top of their tree. Here we go.
I was watching that, and we have nothing like that, and that is
Yeah.
a crazy situation.
Marksman Hunters spend 19 points before they even go to the middle part of their tree, right? So like they're not able to get the things that they want later. Like you guys look like you're spending more than 8 up here, but that's fine. I don't think there's an issue with that. One thing is you don't have the extra charge on Blood Boil. That's going to be weird, I think.
It's mostly quality of life, but it's quality of life I wish we had and didn't have to spend an extra point that isn't needed for pathing for. But yeah, I don't know.
I think they should just make it baseline because again, it's along the lines of like, yes, it is cool to select things that are not useful all the time to make you more powerful in those situations where they are not useful by unselecting it and selecting something else. Removing quality of life things that are always beneficial for DK, like 2 charges of Blood Boil, that having to choose that feels wrong. You want to be able to have basically what you have now, but a little bit more. And it seems like you get that at the bottom part of this tree. Blood DKs are certainly, the next expansion, are not looking like they're this weak version of themselves. They're going to be pretty fucking strong, right? It's just the little decisions like that, I think, matter, like all the way through these trees.
I'd say we're strong, but kind of awkward as far as how we play.
Yeah.
Or like right now, to be honest, that's definitely what DK feels like.
Apparently there's also a bug with Heart Strike right now where it's only generating 10 runic power instead of 15, but they'll probably get that fixed.
Yeah, like I feel like my main concern with this one, I guess, is probably just similar with Bear 2, is it doesn't feel special. I feel like we're just playing the same DK, but I don't know if other classes feel that way. Like I haven't really looked into Hunter or Shaman and stuff. Because like I've been hearing about how Shamans have like all these super sick stuff, like that new Stone Skin Totem and stuff. And Rogues, they get a bunch of cool stuff. But it feels like for DK and even Druid Tank, you don't really gain much going into the next expansion. You sort of just play the same.
Also, I do want to say that I think people might be underselling Ossuary a little bit, because there's a big difference between having a 115 runic power pool with 40 cost death strikes and having a 125 runic power pool with 35 cost death strike. Even if it doesn't give you any more damage or mitigation throughput, it's like having that pool of runic power and death strikes just really helps smooth out dangerous situation.
All right, I think that's pretty much it. Do you guys have any other takes about blood or anything DK in general?
That about covers it.
Hell yeah.
It should be.
Dude, I'm really glad we got you on, Kyrasis. The chat was a big fan of your very soothing voice. Dorky and your voice as like the two Blood DK talker guys is like a duality of insanely good voices for different reasons. And then again, thanks for Muffin and Taze for coming on as well. It was really insightful. I hope we hear some more stuff soon. It sounds like the DK guy is like kind of working overtime. He's doing a lot of stuff. So maybe within like 1 to 2 weeks, we could do another follow-up specifically about Unholy for sure. All right. Thanks for coming on, guys.
Yep,
Thank
thanks
you.
for having us.
Yep. See ya.